Drake hilariously destroys Jimmy Kimmel on live TV. His response shocked everyone. Before we dive in, kindly hit the subscribe button and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Drake is no stranger to the limelight. For decades, he's dominated the silver screen, earning iconic status through his roles in The Good, The Bad, and The Ugly, Dirty Harry, and Unforgiven. His commanding presence, gravelly voice, and unwavering stoicism made him a household name synonymous with gritty, no-nonsense characters who face the world head-on. But despite all his fame, Drake has always been notoriously private, rarely engaging in public appearances, especially not on the late-night circuit. So when his team confirmed that Drake would be appearing on Jimmy Kimmel Live, it caused quite a stir. The entertainment world buzzed with excitement, and expectations soared. Kimmel, who had built a reputation as one of the sharpest, quickest wits in late-night television, was known for his playful, often irreverent interviews with Hollywood's finest. Would Drake, the tough cowboy-turned-director, meet Jimmy's quick humor with his usual stone-faced demeanor? Or would the audience witness a side of Drake they had never seen before? In the hours leading up to the taping, Kimmel's crew speculated about what the interaction might look like. They joked about whether Drake would show up in his trademark rugged style, perhaps with a cigar in hand, silently surveying the room like one of his strong, silent-type characters. Would he deliver his lines with the dry wit of a man who had seen it all? Or would he play the grizzled Hollywood veteran and give Kimmel a hard time? No one really knew what to expect from Drake, only adding to the intrigue. As the studio doors opened, Drake walked in with the unmistakable aura of someone who had lived 1,000 lives, both on screen and in real life. His presence alone was enough to silence the bustling crew. Dressed in his usual understated fashion black jacket, dark jeans, and polished boots, he exuded effortless cool, as if he had just stepped off a film set. The audience erupted into applause as Drake made his way to the stage. His steady pace and calm demeanor conveyed the quiet confidence of someone used to commanding attention without even trying. When he finally took his seat beside Jimmy Kimmel, the energy in the room was electric. Kimmel greeted him with his usual warmth, but something felt different in the air. Maybe it was the sheer history Drake carried with him, or perhaps it was the unspoken understanding that this wasn't just another guest appearance. Kimmel had hosted some of the biggest names in entertainment, but Drake was different. This wasn't just a celebrity. This was a living legend. Every word out of his mouth held weight. For a moment, there was silence. The audience, still buzzing with anticipation, waited for that first spark. Jimmy Kimmel, never one to shy away from taking the lead, leaned in with a grin. "Drake, it's an honor to have you here. I have to admit, though, I didn't expect the most intimidating man in Hollywood to show up and steal my job." The crowd laughed at Kimmel's attempt to break the ice, but everyone knew the real anticipation was about what would happen next. Drake, a man known for being measured in his speech, with a calm yet commanding presence, could either laugh it off or turn the joke right back on Jimmy. And in that moment, something flickered in Drake's eyes. A hint of mischief. Something not obvious to the casual viewer. But those who had followed his career closely knew that under that tough exterior, Drake had always harbored a dry, subtle sense of humor one he rarely showed in public. This wasn't going to be an ordinary interview. The stage was set for an unlikely showdown. And for the first time in years, the audience found themselves wondering, could Drake not only hold his own, but actually steal the spotlight from Jimmy Kimmel? The lights dimmed slightly as Jimmy Kimmel settled into his chair behind the desk, his playful grin still intact as he looked over at Drake. The studio buzzed with excitement, but the vibe had shifted. This wasn't just lighthearted late-night energy. It felt charged, significant. Drake wasn't just another guest. It felt like the entire legacy of Hollywood had walked into the room. The audience leaned forward, fully engaged, as the banter began. "Drake, I've got to say it's a real honor having you here tonight," Kimmel said, leaning into the mic, voice dripping with charm. "But I've got to admit, I didn't expect the most intimidating man in Hollywood to show up and take my job. You're in the hot seat, and I'm the one who's supposed to be making the jokes. What gives?" The audience laughed again, but there was a current of tension beneath the humor. Everyone knew Jimmy was a master of live TV comedy, famous for perfectly timed zingers. But Drake was not your typical late-night guest. He rarely shared his personal side, especially not in a setting built around playful jabs and jokes. Kimmel clearly didn't expect much of a comeback, but Drake wasn't there to follow a script. With an almost imperceptible smile, Drake looked at Kimmel steadily, as though weighing his words. Then, with a casual, deliberate motion, he leaned in slightly. His weathered face lit up with a glimmer of amusement. "Oh, Jimmy," Drake said in that deep, gravelly voice, "I've been watching your show. You've got some real talent. I've been around a long time, but I'm not sure I could do what you do here every night." For a moment, the crowd went silent. Drake, Hollywood's most notorious tough guy, was complimenting Jimmy Kimmel, but there was something in Drake's tone, something sly. He wasn't entirely serious. Beneath that calm exterior was a sharp wit, and it was clear to everyone in the room. Drake had just turned the tables. Jimmy blinked in surprise. His usual quick-fire responses paused for a beat. He had expected a polite chuckle or a gruff one-liner. Instead, Drake had delivered a calm, disarming comment that caught him completely off guard. Jimmy laughed nervously and tried to regain his footing. "Well, Drake, I'm glad you liked the show, but I've got to ask, what's it like sitting across from me and actually having the chance to roast me for once?" It was a decent recovery, and the audience laughed again. But the power dynamic had shifted. Kimmel, usually in control, was now the one adapting. Drake was playing by his own rules, and so far, he was winning. As the conversation rolled on, Jimmy shifted gears, diving into Drake's legendary career. "You know, Drake," Jimmy began, "you've got this amazing ability to stare down villains on screen. But I think your ability to stare down me in real life might be even more impressive." The audience laughed, recognizing the reference to Drake's iconic tough guy persona. But Drake didn't just laugh along. Instead, he locked eyes with Kimmel, and with a tone that walked the line between sincere and subtly cutting, he delivered a perfect counter. "Well, Jimmy," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I'm not the one sitting behind a desk cracking jokes at other people's expense." A beat passed, then the crowd erupted in laughter. Even Jimmy had to laugh, caught off guard by Drake's deadpan delivery. It was a perfect moment. Drake hadn't raised his voice or made a show of it, but he turned the tables completely, with nothing more than timing and presence. Kimmel, for the first time that evening, seemed a little off balance. His usual effortless humor had just been overshadowed by Drake's unexpected charisma. Over the next few minutes, the audience watched in awe as Drake, who had built a career on portraying hardened men of action, demonstrated that he also possessed a razor-sharp wit. He wasn't the stoic, emotionless figure people often imagined. Instead, Drake delivered subtle humor with perfect pacing, surprising everyone, including Kimmel. He wasn't just playing the tough guy. He was playing the room, and he was winning. Jimmy tried to recover. "All right, Drake," he said with a grin. "I get it, you've still got that edge. But I've got to ask, what's your secret? How do you stay so sharp after all these years? Is there a routine, a diet, a meditation app?" Drake gave a small smirk. "It's simple, Jimmy. You stay quiet when you need to, and you speak when you've got something worth saying." The audience burst into applause. This time, not because of Jimmy's jokes, but because Drake had shown them something rare: the art of restraint. In just a few words, he flipped the energy of the show on its head. Kimmel smiled, nodding, but he knew this was no longer his show. The audience could sense the shift. This wasn't the usual rhythm of a late-night talk show. The playful, fast-paced energy that normally defined Jimmy Kimmel Live had evolved into something more intense, something almost reverent. Kimmel, the charming host with a reputation for steering the show effortlessly, suddenly seemed like the underdog. For a man who made a living getting laughs from even the most seasoned celebrities, Jimmy now found himself facing someone who couldn't be rattled. Drake wasn't fazed by the quick jokes. He didn't try to one-up Jimmy. He didn't need to. Instead, he responded with calm precision, every line carefully measured. No wasted words, no unnecessary emotion, just presence. And it was enough to throw Kimmel off his game. Jimmy tried to regain control by poking fun at Drake's age, his roles, and his iconic silence. "Drake, you've been around for decades," Jimmy joked. "But I think the most shocking thing about you is that you're still this sharp at your age." The crowd laughed, expecting Drake to meet the jab with another tough guy line or playful comeback. But Drake didn't take the bait. Instead, he responded with a slow, deliberate chuckle, then said something that froze the moment. You know, Jimmy, Drake said, voice steady and sure, it's not about age. It's about knowing when to stay quiet and when to speak. He paused. It's about playing your cards carefully. Something I've learned over the years. No punchline, no theatrics, just truth. The room fell quiet, not out of awkwardness, but out of awe. Kimmel, usually quick with a retort, just nodded, letting the moment hang in the air. There was nothing to add, nothing to top it. Drake was no longer just a guest. He had taken control of the conversation without raising his voice, without competing for attention. And somehow it made everyone in the room lean in just a little closer. Trying to regain his footing, Kimmel shifted the conversation back to Drake's film career, hoping nostalgia might help him reclaim some ground. You know, Drake, Jimmy said, leaning forward, I've got to ask, what was it like playing the ultimate anti-hero? The kind of guy who doesn't need to say much to be feared? Drake didn't hesitate. Well, Jimmy, he said coolly, that's the thing. Sometimes you don't need to say much at all. You just have to look at someone and know they're not worth your time. It was pure Drake, cool, calculated, perfectly delivered. Jimmy paused. He tried to joke again. That's a nice trick, he said, chuckling. Wish I could pull that off. But the audience wasn't laughing at Jimmy anymore. They were waiting for Drake. Every word out of his mouth carried weight, and Kimmel's rapid-fire humor was starting to fade into the background. As the conversation continued, Drake's calm responses deflected every attempt Jimmy made to regain control. Kimmel tossed out references to Dirty Harry, expecting laughs. But Drake wasn't there to relive movie moments for cheap applause. Instead, he brought the conversation back to something deeper. You know, Jimmy, Drake said, interrupting with quiet conviction, Dirty Harry wasn't about being tough. It was about being smart enough to know when to take a stand. You have to read the situation. And suddenly, it wasn't just a movie reference anymore. Kimmel, realizing Drake was playing a completely different game, tried to recover. Okay, Drake, Jimmy laughed. I get it. I'm learning from the master here. But hey, what's the secret to staying so sharp all these years? You got a daily routine or something? Drake paused for a moment, then leaned in with that signature half smile. It's simple, Jimmy. You stay quiet when you need to, and you speak when it matters. Another thunderclap of laughter and applause, but this time it wasn't because of a joke. It was because Drake had, in just a few words, shown that he had mastered the art of understatement. And in doing so, he'd flipped the dynamic of the entire interview. Jimmy Kimmel, so often the one who dictated the rhythm of every conversation, was now the one trying to keep up. By this point in the interview, the audience had completely adjusted to Drake's unexpected rhythm of quiet dominance that was both captivating and disarming. Jimmy Kimmel, the longtime master of the late-night narrative, now seemed like a student. And Drake, he was the teacher, calm, confident, and entirely in control. It wasn't just what Drake said, it was how he said it, or more accurately, how he chose not to say more than necessary. Every pause, every measured response carried intention. You don't rush it, Drake had said. You wait. And when it's time to speak, you speak. It was a kind of presence that went beyond performance. Drake wasn't giving a talk show interview, he was delivering a masterclass in poise and self-awareness. And without ever raising his voice or changing his expression, he had subtly reversed the roles. The guest had become the guide. Jimmy, sensing the gravity of the moment, leaned in again. I have to say, Drake, you've got this incredible calm about you. It's like nothing phases you, not my jokes, not the cameras, not the chaos. Drake tilted his head slightly, offering a near whisper in return. You've got to be calm if you want to make it through this business. The trick is knowing when to pause. Take a breath before you act, before you speak. And for a second, it didn't feel like a show anymore. The laughter and lights faded into the background as the audience hung on his words. Drake wasn't just talking about Hollywood. He was talking about life. That silence before reacting, that breath before responding. It was something everyone in that room and millions watching from home recognized as missing from their own daily chaos. You can't get lost in the noise, Drake added. You've got to stay aware, stay focused. Kimmel, usually the one steering things back toward lightheartedness, didn't try to undercut it with humor this time. Instead, he simply nodded, visibly affected by the weight of Drake's perspective. "So you're telling me," Jimmy said with uncharacteristic sincerity, "that in a world that never slows down, we need to pause, breathe, just be." Drake returned the nod, calm as ever. "Exactly. People rush through life, always chasing the next thing. But if you're not present in the moment, you miss it all." Jimmy Kimmel sat back, thoughtful. The man who usually bounced from joke to joke now found himself immersed in something deeper, an interview that had become a conversation about presence, awareness, and living with intention. "Drake," he said, "you've been in this business for decades. Do you think this ability to stay calm, does it come naturally, or is it something you had to work at?" Drake paused before answering. His gaze softened slightly, though his voice remained steady. "A bit of both, I suppose. You learn it over time. Some of it comes naturally, but mostly it's practice. Like anything else, the more you do it, the better you get." He shifted slightly in his seat, then continued. "The real key is mindfulness. Staying aware of what's around you, not letting all the noise cloud your judgment." And then he dropped the kind of line that stays with you. "You can't rush through life. You have to be intentional in your actions, in what you say, and in how you respond." It wasn't flashy, it wasn't designed for a soundbite, but it landed with more power than any perfectly crafted monologue. Drake wasn't trying to impress. He was simply sharing what he knew. Not about Hollywood, but about life. And the audience could feel it. They were no longer watching just another celebrity interview. They were witnessing something real. Jimmy, clearly moved, said, "So you're saying that in all this chaos, the best thing we can do is slow down and just listen?" Drake nodded once more. "Exactly. If you're always focused on what's next, you'll miss what's right in front of you." The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was full of respect, full of reflection. The audience, used to laughing along with Jimmy Kimmel's nightly guests, was now contemplating their own lives. Because Drake wasn't speaking like a performer, he was speaking like someone who had lived long enough to understand what really matters. The conversation had shifted once again. What started as a playful late-night interview was now something deeper, a moment of shared reflection, not just between Jimmy and Drake, but with everyone watching. Jimmy sensed it too. He leaned forward, this time more curious than performative. "Drake," he said, "you've played some of the most iconic tough guys in movie history. Guys who were angry, intense, and always walking the edge. But I've always wondered, how does Drake, the real person, deal with anger in real life?" The question hung in the air. The studio went still. Drake leaned back in his chair, his fingers laced together, his gaze calm but piercing. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and even, but every word carried weight. "Anger's a part of life, Jimmy," he said. "It's a natural emotion. Everyone feels it whether they admit it or not. The key is understanding it and controlling it. Because if you don't control your anger, it controls you." Jimmy nodded, genuinely listening. "Was that always easy for you, or did it take time?" Drake didn't flinch. "It took time," he admitted. "When I was younger, I had a lot of fire in me. That fire can burn you if you're not careful. I had to learn how to direct it, how to use it without letting it take over." There was no bravado in his voice, no effort to sound like the Hollywood tough guy, just honest reflection. "Being angry might feel good in the moment," he continued, "but it doesn't get you anywhere." "Not really." The audience was silent, absorbing every word. Jimmy leaned in again. "So what's the secret then? How do you keep from snapping when life throws chaos at you?" Drake's answer was simple, but powerful. "You pause," he said. "You take a step back. You breathe. And you ask yourself, this anger going to fix anything? Most of the time it won't. When you're angry," he added, "the worst thing you can do is keep talking. That's when you say things you regret. That's when you do damage." Kimmel, visibly affected, nodded. "That's powerful," he said, "and I imagine that's not easy, right? Especially with everything life throws at us." Drake gave a small, knowing smile. "It's not easy," he said, "but nothing worthwhile ever is." The conversation had taken on a new layer of depth. It was no longer just about Hollywood or Drake's career, it had become something much more personal. Jimmy, who usually prided himself on keeping things fun and fast, now found himself slowing down, reflecting. So you're saying, Jimmy asked, that the most powerful thing we can do is to not react? Drake gave a subtle nod. That's right. You can't let every emotion run wild. You've got to own your reactions. If you want better relationships, if you want to be a better man, you've got to do the work. Every day, the audience, once laughing at jokes, now sat in complete silence, hanging on every word. And when you mess up, Jimmy asked, what then? Drake didn't hesitate. You try again. You own your mistakes. You don't pretend they didn't happen. But you also don't let them define you. He paused, then added, the strongest thing you can do sometimes is nothing at all. Just sit with it. Let it pass. Then make your next move with clarity, not anger. At that moment, Jimmy Kimmel looked at Drake not as a celebrity guest, but as a man with wisdom hard-earned through decades of life, success, mistakes, and reflection. I think we could all learn something from you, Drake, Jimmy said. No longer trying to get laughs, just speaking truth. Drake gave the smallest smile. We all have to work on it. No one's perfect. But the effort, that's what matters. The audience, who had come expecting stories about movie sets and one-liners from Dirty Harry, instead got something far more lasting. A message, a philosophy, a way to live. As the lights dimmed and the segment drew to a close, Jimmy looked at Drake one last time. Thanks for being here, Drake. I don't think this was the interview anyone expected, but I think it's the one we all needed. Drake just nodded. Glad to be here, Jimmy. And with that, the audience rose to its feet, this time not just out of admiration for a Hollywood legend, but out of respect for the man behind the legend. Backstage, the energy was different. Drake had entered Jimmy Kimmel Live as a guest, but he had exited as something far more unexpected, a source of wisdom. The crew, usually buzzing about punchlines and celebrity antics, was unusually quiet, still processing what they had just witnessed. Even Jimmy was quieter than usual as the cameras shut off. He wasn't used to being outmatched, not in the spotlight, and certainly not in his domain. But this wasn't about who was funnier or quicker. This was about presence, insight, and Drake had owned every second of it without ever trying to. In the days that followed, clips of the interview went viral, but not the usual late-night highlights. It wasn't Drake's clever comebacks, or even the subtle digs at Jimmy that drew the most attention. It was his words about anger, mindfulness, control, and presence that echoed across social media. The headline on one trending video read, Drake teaches Jimmy Kimmel a lesson in emotional control. Comments poured in. I needed to hear this today. I've struggled with my temper for years. This interview gave me real perspective. I always admired Drake as an actor. Now I admire him as a man. Even Jimmy took to Twitter, posting, well, folks, I guess I'll leave the emotional wisdom to Drake. What a night. Thanks for the lesson, my friend. The post was retweeted hundreds of times, with comments filled with gratitude and admiration, not just for the performance, but for the authenticity. People didn't just see Drake as a tough guy anymore. They saw him as someone who had earned his stillness, someone who had lived, learned, and was willing to pass it on. The interview had transcended late-night entertainment. It had become a memento, rare, genuine exchange in a media world often built on noise and distraction. And the most powerful part? Drake didn't do it with flash or fame or force. He did it with silence, with calm, with truth. In a world that moves fast and rewards reaction, Drake reminded us all of something timeless. The greatest strength isn't how loud you speak. It's knowing when to say nothing at all. And in doing so, he gave millions of viewers more than entertainment. He gave them something to live by.